Book of Nehemiah, the cupbearer, the rebuilder of the wall. If not looking for a promise, we're trying to nail down this request that Nehemiah made of God to see if God is actually going to do this for him. This was the request in Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 1. He prayed to the Lord. He said, "O Lord, I beseech you, may your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant and the prayer of your servants, all of Israel, who delight to revere your name." And this was the request. Make your servant successful today and grant him compassion before this man. Now I was cupbearer to the king, as if to say the man I'm referring to is the king. The king is Artaxerxes. The king is not a lover of the Jews. He has stopped the rebuilding of Jerusalem. So Nehemiah is asking for success. For Artaxerxes to grant Nehemiah permission to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. Remember just a couple of photos of the walls of Jerusalem there. This was no small task. This was a gargantuan task for people. For Jews that weren't stonemasons, as we read in Nehemiah, sons, daughters, merchants, goldsmiths, everybody had their hand. I'm sure the bakers, everybody was helping build the walls of this city back up. Not a small task. We're going to start again in Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 10, and see that Israel was exhausted. The Jews were exhausted from 4 weeks, 5 weeks now of working on this wall day in and day out, not going to their normal jobs, putting all their efforts on securing their city. And in Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 10, it says, "Thus in Judah, among the Jews, this is what is being said, the strength of the burden bearers is failing." They are exhausted from building this heavy wall. The strength of the burden bearers is failing, yet there is more rubbish, and we ourselves are unable to rebuild it. I talked last night, I showed you, or last time we were together Wednesday, some of these pictures of current Jerusalem. This is not the wall they rebuilt, but it was much like this. This is the wall around current Jerusalem. This is the southern wall, looking at the picture there of Jerusalem. This is the southern wall of the city. But anyway, I showed you more pictures of the wall, and I told you it says here that there is much rubbish. Yet there is much rubbish, and I told you about this event when we were in Israel where there was piles of rocks that had been torn, that had been broken down by the Romans and pushed off the wall. This is the southwest corner of the Temple Mount, and as I go down, I just went up to show you the height of it. The western wall is down the wall, but look at that rubbish. That's not a pile of rocks that the Jews put there. Those are the rocks that the Romans threw off. They were covered in dirt for centuries. Archaeologists have come along and picked these rock, picked all the dirt out like they do, and they can see the stones when Jesus said, "Not one stone will be left upon another." Is this the next one? This is a view from the other side there. I just wanted you to see what I was talking about, these heaps of stones. Sorry for the bad camera. That's hyssop, by the way, the same plant that they were having a bar mitzvah there at the wall. But that is hyssop growing out of the wall. And those are those stones. Those are those ancient stones that made the original temple that were thrown off the Temple Mount by the Romans. Again, having been covered in dirt for centuries, modern archaeology is just going back and uncovering all these things. That old city of Jerusalem tells 1,000 stories. When Jesus came in, they say, and the money changers and all those people that were exchanging turtle doves for shekels and all this stuff, this used to be a market street with stores, and where these money changers would have been. Some of the money changers set up in that area where we were. So just a picture of the wall and the rubble on the wall. It says in verse 11, this is the temple. Remember in Ezra's day, or in Ezra's writings, he wrote about in 515 BC, the temple had been rebuilt. It wasn't Solomon's temple. It was built on the same ground, but now Zerubbabel had led a team to rebuild the temple. This is 80 years old already. It's been rebuilt. It's back up. It's functioning somewhat, but the walls and the gates of the city are still torn down. So the temple stands when Nehemiah is writing and working. Verse 11 says, to our enemies. Oh, more pictures. Hold on. Sorry, didn't go far enough with the pictures. Amy bought these pictures from Abeka, the same group that Savannah and Caleb homeschooled through, Pensacola Christian College. They've got this whole session or teaching pictures and curriculum and stuff set up to teach kids, and these pictures were just too good not to use. Remember, just backdating the story a little bit, remember when Nehemiah went on his night journey. He had chosen after 3 days a few men that he trusted, and he went and he scouted out the situation and the condition of the walls. And some of these artist depictions are just wonderful. That's him on his night walk. This is an artist depiction of the work going on. You see the young boy there. I tell you, everybody was involved. People carrying timber, people carving stones out like this man is with the heavy hammer, making sure that the fit is right. The boy has lumber in his hands. It was all hands on deck. Continuing just in the pictures that I took today, we have another depiction, this artist depiction of the wall being built. An altar there built to the Lord, the priest in the white worshiping the Lord there. We see a picture here of the walls being built, probably Nehemiah depicted in the front with the plan of the walls, talking to some sort of foreman concerning the rebuilding of the walls. I just want you to get a kind of a scale of size here to see just what we're talking about. We're not talking about building a fence. We're talking about building a massive, massive stone structure. Massive, heavy. You see the lifting things that they have here. Most of these stones, no single man, not a group of men would be able to lift up one of these stones. They are massive. And you've got goldsmiths and their daughters rebuilding this wall. Everybody was in on it. It was a major feat. Remember, we got to the halfway point in our last session where they said that the wall had been built to the halfway point. This is a depiction of that halfway point. You'll see the walls aren't completely built all the way to the height, and there's no gate. There's no door in the gate. So the walls are half built there. That probably took about 4 weeks for them to rebuild the city to that point. So we get back into the story in verse 11. It says, our enemies said, because where the Jews are doing things for Jerusalem, the enemies of God are never far behind. And there were enemies here. The enemies were saying they will not know or see until we come among them, kill them, and put a stop to the work. So Satan has his men on the ground trying to keep Jerusalem from being rebuilt. Sanballat, remember Geshem, there were 3 men, Tobiah, and this is a depiction of those men. Israel's enemies. Verse 12 says, when the Jews who lived near them came and told us 10 times, they will come up against us from every place where you may turn. That's when Nehemiah took action. He knew that this was not an idle threat. He knew that these people wanted to kill Jews. If there's nothing new under the sun, if there's one truth that never changes generation after generation, it's that there are people on earth that want to annihilate the Jews. And here is just another group of people led by these 3 men at this juncture in history. They want to kill the Jews. They're taunting the Jews, saying, while your heads are down doing the work, we will sneak up on you and kill you. You won't even see us coming. You're that involved in the work, you won't even see us coming. And for that reason, this great leader Nehemiah posts armed guards. He posts armed guards there while the work is being done. Look what the scripture says. When I saw their fear. Verse 13. Then I stationed men in the lowest parts of the space behind the wall, the exposed places. And I stationed the people and families with their swords and spears and bows. Everybody was armed. Everybody was armed. When I saw their fear, Not only did he set it up, but he had something to say to the people to calm them and reassure them. He said, when I saw their fear of this threat of being killed by Israel's enemies, I rose and I spoke. What a man. To the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people. So to anyone who would hear in Jerusalem, Nehemiah had a message, and this was the message: do not be afraid of them. Fear not. Do not be afraid of them, and this is the reason why. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome. We are doing a work that God is behind, God is in favor of. No one can stop this. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers. He expected, it seems, some altercation. He tells them, fight for your brothers, for your sons, for your daughters, your wives, and your houses. If they come, we will fight. And he armed them to the teeth. In verse 15, it worked. It's very interesting, when you arm yourself as a nation, the deterrent is very real. When Israel here around the city of Jerusalem armed themselves, the deterrent to enemy attack worked. Look what it says in verse 15. When our enemies heard that it was known to us, their desire to attack us, when our enemies heard that it was known to us and that God had frustrated their plan of a secret attack, then all of us returned to the wall, each one to his work, because the enemy stood down. Verse 16. From that day on, listen to what Nehemiah, listen how he's organized his men, his women, everybody that's there. It says, from that day on, half of my servants carried on the work. Look at this picture while I read this to you. Look at everybody on the wall and the interesting things they have with them. From that day on, half of my servants carried on the work, while half of them held the spears. You see that depicted here. The shields, the bows, and the breastplates, and the captains were behind the whole house of Judah. Verse 17 says, those who were rebuilding the wall and those who carried burdens took their load with one hand doing the work, and the other was holding a weapon. Look at this picture. Oh, I wish it was darker. I wish it was brighter. You can see this person carrying a load, and look what the artist depicted right here. A knife, some sort of small sword in his right hand. Here's the spearsman. I don't think that's a word, but here's the guy carrying the spear while carrying a load. Who knows what's in the bucket, mortar, the basket, what he's doing, but he's got a weapon with him. On the wall here, you see armed guards keeping guard while men beside them are working. You see the same thing over here. It's an excellent depiction of this verse. And boy, it's a lot brighter on my screen than it is up there. I wonder why that is. Maybe it's bulb time. Anyway, Nehemiah arming the people. Arming the people. And that's exactly what he did. In verse 18 it says, as for the builders, each wore his sword girded at his side while he built, while the trumpeter stood near me. So Nehemiah has a trumpeter. He's got a man with the shofar at the ready. And if he's attacked, the trumpet is to blast. Look what it says in verse 19. Nehemiah continuing with the plan, running this show. A wonderful leader of men. I said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, the work is great and extensive, and we're separated on the wall far from one another. At whatever place you hear the sound of the trumpet, rally to us there. Our God will fight for us. So Nehemiah says that if any of the wall is attacked, I'll send the trumpeter there. He will trumpet, rally, stop what you're doing, and come there and defend the city of Jerusalem. I don't know how many of you have ever heard a shofar and thinking, what sound could the little horn make? This Jewish man in Galilee is going to show you. Listen to what the shofar sounds like. Woo. Now imagine that in a city that's hollow, with walls that are high, no tall buildings, that sound traveling across the wall there. This is what Nehemiah was offering the people. When you hear the shofar blast, you gather to the area from which the shofar sound came from, and you fight our enemies there alongside God, who will lead the battle. Our God will fight for us. Into verse 21, so we carried on the work. We're trying to get to the end of the story. Is Nehemiah going to complete the work of the wall? Is God going to give him favor before Artaxerxes? Does he really complete the wall? It says, so we carried on the work, with half of them holding spears from dawn until the stars appeared. They didn't take many breaks. What a hard-working group. Verse 22, at that time I also said to the people, let each man with his servants spend the night within Jerusalem. Don't go home to Bethany, all these nearby cities 2 or 3 miles away. Stay here in the city. Let each man with his servants spend the night within Jerusalem, so that they may be a guard for us by night and a laborer by day. So he's kind of sequestered some of the workforce there to get this job done even quicker. And verse 23 says, so neither I, my brothers, remember, this is a leader who gets involved himself. He's building the wall also. Neither I, my brothers, my servants, nor the men of the guard who followed me, none of us removed our clothes. Each took his weapon, even to the water, armed to the teeth, ready to defend Jerusalem. But Nehemiah chapter 4 ends, and there's no wall completed. The wall's halfway built. It's continuing to be built. The people are exhausted. Nehemiah's encouraging them now with weapons. We get into Nehemiah chapter 5, and there's a break in the story, but let me just tell you what happens just very quickly. There's a problem. While the wall is being rebuilt, within this 52 days, 8-week period of time, there's an issue that comes up about food distribution. My people aren't getting enough food. They're not getting their daily ration. There's also interest that's being charged, heavy interest being charged to Jews by other Jews. Nehemiah is having to work as their governor to solve these problems. There's not enough grain to eat, and Nehemiah resolves these disputes perfectly. I just want to show you a verse from Nehemiah chapter 5. It's kind of off the subject, but it's what comes next in the book. Just a verse that shows that Nehemiah had been appointed the governor. He's not only the leader of Israel, but King Artaxerxes has made him the governor of Judah. He is in charge of the Jews to report back to Artaxerxes, the Persian king. So in Nehemiah chapter 5, verse 14, this is what the scripture says. Moreover, from the day that I was appointed to be their governor in the land of Judah, this is Nehemiah speaking, and he gives his reign. Thank goodness for these things. We can date them because of verses like this. From the 20th year to the 32nd year of King Artaxerxes, for 12 years, neither I nor my kinsmen have eaten the governor's food allowance. But the former governors who were before me laid burdens on the people, and they took from them bread and wine, besides 40 shekels of silver. They were taking a lot from the people. Even their servants domineered the people, but I did not do so because of the fear of God. Nehemiah says, the way I handled my governorship in Judah was above reproach. And look what he says a couple of verses down. Interesting statement from Nehemiah to his God. In Nehemiah 5:19, he says, remember me, O my God, for good, according to all that I have done for this people. That is an amazing statement to be able to make. That Nehemiah is qualified. This isn't the only time Nehemiah says something like this. He says it 3 or 4 times in the book of Nehemiah. I have done good for the people of Israel, Lord. Remember me. I've been faithful, a trustworthy governor of your people. Wonderful man. We get into Nehemiah chapter 6. I just wanted to cover chapter 5 quickly, just to give a highlight of what's going on. In Nehemiah chapter 6, these Sanballat, Tobiah, Gershom, these people that are enemies of Nehemiah, they plot to kill him. They try to lure him into the temple because they are trying to kill him. And so in Nehemiah chapter 6, this is what the Bible says in verse 8 and 9. It says, "Then I sent a message." I think it was 4 times, maybe 3 times, they kept sending a message to me and Nehemiah, "Come and visit us. We have some things to talk about. It will be friendly, a friendly visit." But the idea was that they were trying to get him alone so they could kill him, bring him into them. Nehemiah's had enough of this. He finally says this, "Such things as you are saying have not been done." They're accusing him of having to rebuilding Jerusalem because he's planning this coup against King Artaxerxes. If you read Nehemiah 6, you'll see it. They're accusing him of wanting to rebuild Jerusalem, make himself the king of Jerusalem, and start a revolution against King Artaxerxes. That is what they are pinning on him. And his response is, none of that's true. And you know it's not. "Such things as you are saying have not been done, but you are inventing them in your own mind. To date, we have not seen Nehemiah say anything to his opponents until now." And this is what he had to say. "None of what you're saying is true. You're making it all up. For all of them were trying," it says, this is why he said that, "for all of them were trying to frighten us, thinking they will become discouraged with the work and it will not be done." They were trying to kill Nehemiah to discourage everybody else from working. And he prays again, "But now, O God, strengthen my hands." That's Nehemiah chapter 6. But what about the wall? We're building the wall, the great wall of Jerusalem, the gates of Jerusalem, and God puts Nehemiah 5 and 6 in there and stops the progress of the wall. Almost kills me. Let's get back to the wall, Lord. What about the wall? Was it ever finished? Did you answer Nehemiah's prayer? Look what it says in the book of Nehemiah, chapter 6, verse 15. It's supposed to be here. Here it is. "The great walls of the old city of Jerusalem." Imagine the job it would be to build 20 feet of a wall like that. 20 feet would take months. And they built it all the way around the city that existed, as it says here, in 52 days. Look what it says. Nehemiah chapter 6, verse 15. Finally, Nehemiah gets what he prayed for all those months ago before King Artaxerxes, when he asked God, "Give me favor, show me compassion before this man." In Nehemiah 6:15, finally we get the statement, "So the wall was completed on the 25th of the month Elul in 52 days." Almost a miraculous feat for the people that were building this wall to build this in 8 weeks or so. Astounding that they could do this. And look what it had, the effect that it had when the wall was completed. It says, when all our enemies heard it and all the nations surrounding us saw it, they lost their confidence, for they recognized that this work had been accomplished with the help of our God. Sticking to his guns, rallying his troops, defending the city of Jerusalem, encouraging the people by working beside them, praying beside them, leading them to understand God is in this work, keep doing it. Nehemiah got one of the greatest feats of all history done when people are threatening, right there in their faces, threatening to kill them. Nehemiah rallied these people to continue building that wall. And in 52 weeks, the walls of Jerusalem are completed. Just an astounding event. I want to take you to another couple chapters of Nehemiah before we close. In Nehemiah chapter 8, an event takes place that I know all of us would have loved to have been there for. Look what it says in Nehemiah chapter 8, verse 2 and 3. Sometimes your pastors, who is supposed to quit teaching at 12 noon, sometimes your pastor drones on a little past 12. Look at what happened in Nehemiah chapter 8, verse 2 and 3 at the walls of old Jerusalem. It says, Then Ezra the priest brought the law before the assembly of men, women, and all who could listen with understanding. On the first day of the 7th month, Ezra gets the scrolls out. And it says in verse 3, he read from it. He read from the scrolls from the law of Moses before the square which was in front of the water gate from early morning until midday. What is that, 8, 9, 10-hour sermon? He read from the scrolls from early morning until midday in the presence of the men and the women, those who could understand, and all the people were attentive to the book of the law. Could have heard a pin drop. From early morning until midday, the priest read from the scrolls. He wasn't even trying to make it interesting. He was just reading the word. It says he read from the scrolls. He wasn't teaching, expanding, extrapolate. He was reading the text of the Mosaic law. And most of the scribe, I would imagine every scroll they had, in a 10-hour, 8 to 10-hour sermon, he could have read a lot of pages. I wonder how many of us could have handled Ezra reading from the law. When we get to Nehemiah chapter 12, it's not until Nehemiah chapter 12 that Nehemiah leads a dedication service for the wall. Long chapter, a long book here, getting to the dedication service of the wall that's been built now, been completed. Ezra's reading at the wall in the square right next to the wall. In Nehemiah chapter 12, look what it says in verse 27. Nehemiah plans this event. This man can do it all. Nehemiah 12:27 says, now at the dedication of the wall of Jerusalem, they sought out the Levites from all their places to bring them to Jerusalem. Remember, the Levites were spread throughout the land. They brought them into Jerusalem for this celebration so that they might celebrate the dedication with gladness, with hymns of thanksgiving. They were singing the Psalms, and with songs of the accompaniment of cymbals, harps, and lyres. This was a large group that came into Jerusalem. What we see in the book in Nehemiah chapter 12 is that Nehemiah split up the groups of Levites into two groups. One of them was led by Ezra the priest. They went to the right on the wall. They started at the same spot. One of them went to the right on the wall all the way around to the temple. And the other group that Nehemiah was a part of went to the left. They went all the way around the city wall with all these cymbals and harps and music and songs of thanksgiving. It would have been wonderfully joyous to have seen this and been a part of this. And then they got to the temple. And when they met at the temple, this is what the scripture says in Nehemiah 12 verse 43. It says, and on that day, remember who Israel is. They've come back from 70 years of Babylon because of disobedience to Yahweh, disobedience to the Mosaic law, idolatry. They get kicked out of the land. They come back into the land. They rebuild the temple. Ezra comes back. He's rebuilding the worship services as a priest. And now Nehemiah has rebuilt the walls. This would have been a great day for the existence of Israel, for the people to understand we are still the people of Yahweh. We're still His chosen people. This great man Nehemiah has led us in all these wonderful ways, and now look what we're doing. The city of God is back together, and we're dedicating this wall and the temple and all these things. It says in Nehemiah 12:43, and on that day they offered great sacrifices and rejoiced because God had given them great joy. Even the women and children rejoiced, so that the joy of Jerusalem was heard from afar. Everybody knew that Jerusalem was celebrating this event. Look at what it says again. Let me just read it to you. What Isaiah prayed for, and look at how God... I finally brought some cheater glasses because of this little Bible. There it is. Listen to what we've been tracing down and see if God did give Nehemiah what he wanted. O Lord, I beseech you, may your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant and the prayer of your servants who delight to revere your name. Make your servant successful today. Grant him compassion before this man the king. And 52 days go by after Nehemiah makes his several-month trip to Jerusalem. 52 days go by and they've rebuilt the walls, the gates, the doors of the city. And a couple months go by and Nehemiah dedicates the wall with this great ceremony of thanksgiving and song and sacrifice. And they're all pointing toward Yahweh who did it all for them. It says they rejoiced because God had given them great joy. Their identities as Jews, the people of God, is coming back together finally. Now, I'm going to say a couple of things here. Actually, I'm going to save them and we're going to stop. I really don't want to do this. I'm contemplating right now whether I'm going to do it or not. Because I love that Israel, I've got to do it. There's a historical period that happens after Nehemiah chapter 12 that is, how do you say it? It's just another downfall of Israel. We're going to talk about this on Wednesday night. We're not going to do it tonight. But I want to show you on Wednesday night in the last couple of chapters of Nehemiah. After everything that's happened in Israel, we wonder, there's a chapter in the book of the Bible in Amos chapter 8 verse 11. There is a very famous statement that God makes to Amos. Through Amos, he says, "Behold, days are coming, declares the Lord God, Yahweh Elohim, when I will send a famine on the land." On this land. When the Jews are here rejoicing because God had given them great joy. They're back in the land. The temple is rebuilt. The offerings, the sacrifices are back in. They're obeying the Mosaic law. How is it that these people yet again walked away from God? Yet again. And I'm going to show you next time in the book of Nehemiah, which is really the last book in the except for Malachi. Nehemiah is the end of the history of Israel before that 400-year silence. And God says, days are coming when I'll send a famine on the land. Not a famine for bread or a thirst for water, but rather for the hearing of the words of the Lord. Amos 8:11. After the wonderful things that this great man Nehemiah did, the great man Zerubbabel, the great priest and scribe Ezra, the great leader, the governor of Judah, Nehemiah, after the great things that they did to bring Israel back into the land, to rebuild the Israeli Jewish heritage, Israel would fall again. Unbelievable. It's painful. I want to leave Nehemiah as the hero, but Israel just can't keep, it seems, from walking away from God. So they walk away from God again, and that's why there is that 400-year period of silence where they're not exiled to the land, but the prophecies stop, the voice of God stops. He's not talking to anybody in Israel for 400 years. The last thing he says through the prophet Malachi is, one day when the king comes, I'll send a herald before him and he will say, make straight paths for the Messiah. But since you don't want me and you refuse to obey my laws, I'll be silent for 400 years. And for 400 years, there's a silence from God that Amos projects here, prophesies, and it comes true until the book of Matthew starts to record this fact that Messiah would come 400 years after these events. I just want to tell you those things and show you a couple of those verses to show you the history of Israel and how it ended. Because it is a great question. Why did Israel not receive Messiah? What was wrong in Israel? Because after the Babylonian captivity, after those 70 years, they came back in, they rebuilt the temple, The priestly service was re-engaged. You would think that it was good for them and that they would have learned their lessons after 70 years in Babylon. You would think that they would obey this God now. We've been broken from that bad habit. We will obey as best as we can, not perfectly, but we will obey you. We won't intermarry with the pagan idolaters, but they do. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's close in prayer. We'll do that on Wednesday. Just to show you why it is that God would become silent for 400 years. Let's close in prayer. Heavenly